welcome to meeting number 62 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. The clerk has advised me that everybody appearing virtually have been sound tested and we're good to go. So again, today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members attending in person and virtually. Before speaking, I would ask you to wait until I recognize you by name. For those appearing virtually, please use the raised hand icon to get my attention. And you have the option of speaking in the official language of your choice by using, if you're appearing virtually, you'll see the icon at the bottom of your surface. For those in the room, use the headpiece. Translation services are provided. I would remind all members to speak slowly for the benefit of the interpreters so they can understand. If there's a loss of interpretation, please signal me, get my attention. We will suspend while it is being clarified. I would also like to remind that screenshots are not allowed or shots in the room during committee meetings. Bill C-35, an act respecting early learning and childcare in Canada. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, February the 3rd, 2023, the committee will continue its study of Bill C-35. I would like to inform all members that they've been tested and we're ready to go. I would like to welcome our witnesses for opening 5-minute statements, and I would ask to recognize the 5-minute period. From Child Care Providers Resource Network, Julie Bisnat, Program Coordinator. The Fédération des communautés francophones et acadiennes du Canada, Alan Dupuis, Executive Director, in the room. Jean-Luc Racine, Representative. From the Foundation Lucie et André Chagonon, Marie-Lou Denault, Senior Advisor, appearing virtually, and Dr. Christia Japel, Representative. So we will begin with Madame Bisnat for 5 minutes, please. Madame, you have the floor.
Hello, and thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, for this opportunity. The Child Care Providers Resource Network is committed to the well-being and safety of all children. We are a nonprofit charitable organization with a mission to provide information, training, resources, and support to those providing childcare in a home setting. For us, childcare is the care of a child, regardless of who provides the care. Parents, grandparents, friends or relatives, in-home nannies, or home childcare providers, whether licensed or unlicensed, both of which are legal. CCPRN was pleased to see that the government introduced a national childcare strategy, but we feel that the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childcare Plan is not nearly as inclusive as it could be. And like those who share our perspective, we advocate for equitable access, quality childcare, and parental choice. To meet the current and expanding demand, Canadian families need all forms of childcare to be affordable and accessible. Limiting parental choice to one type of care conflicts with the notion of a universal plan and hinders access. To improve access, the plan must acknowledge home childcare, both licensed and unlicensed, as a valuable component of the childcare system. Not only does it impact expansion as they are faster and less costly to open, but home childcare also meets the unique needs of Canadian families by allowing them to choose a caregiver with similar values, a shared language, or a shared culture. In partnership with their caregiver, a strong bond is established, resulting in a mutually cohesive relationship focused on the needs of the child. We know that family engagement is essential to each child's development. Home childcare also offers flexible hours beyond the traditional 9-to-5 model, as well as a continuity of care with one primary caregiver, a feature not available in larger centers. These low-ratio, authentic, nurturing environments are found in communities, both urban and rural, across Canada. Championing home childcare as a central part of CWELC would increase access to a diverse array of childcare options. It would also support women entrepreneurs, including newcomers to Canada and racialized women. Home childcare honors the experiences and unique qualities of these caregivers, many of whom are early childhood educators, who provide an essential service in their communities, enriching the lives of young children. With less than 25% of children accessing licensed childcare, CWALC excludes more than 75% of Ontario children and families. Those choosing unlicensed home childcare or an in-home nanny, those choosing informal care arrangements with a friend or relative, and those choosing to stay at home with their own young children. CCPRN believes that parents are competent and capable of making childcare choices best suited to meet their child's and their family's needs. Even within the license system in Ontario, home childcare providers are unable to obtain their own license. Instead, they are obligated to work under the umbrella of an agency licensed by the Ministry of Education. An option for direct licensing would have an immediate impact on available spaces, allowing greater access for families. Incidentally, the collaboration between licensed and unlicensed home childcare is not a new concept. Several years ago, CCPRN and the Canadian Childcare Federation worked together to develop and deliver a national home childcare training program. There are many opportunities for the government to work with all sectors of childcare, but by focusing on one preferred form of care, CWALC promotes inequitable access and allows for the erosion of parental choice. An equity-based lens must be applied, recognizing that not all families or children in Canada are the same. Choice in childcare, along with income-based testing, would pave the way for more inclusive and more equitable access. CWALC funding agreements need to be flexible and inclusive. Allowing the provinces to transfer funds directly to parents is the most effective and efficient way to achieve these goals. Reducing administrative overhead leaves more money for reduced childcare fees for all families, regardless of their choice in childcare. In closing, I would like to share the following two quotes from parents who have chosen home childcare. The first is from Dr. Lisa Walker, clinical neuropsychologist. Quality in home daycare is knowing that your child is in a setting where they have a caregiver who truly cares, who treats the child as they would their own, and who is invested in fostering the healthy development of the child. It is clear to parents when they have a caregiver who enjoys and takes pride in what they do. That passion is then reflected in how they interact with the child, the activities they plan, and the environment they foster. Quality means parents have the peace of mind of knowing that their child is not only safe, but valued. When I found Brenda, I knew that I had found a person with integrity who would provide my child with the kind of quality care I was seeking. And the second quote is from a parent survey. I plan to stay with our current unlicensed home care provider because the quality of care our daughter receives there is far greater than the care she ever received at the licensed center. I would love to have access to the reduced fees. Right now, I feel as if I have to choose between the quality of care my daughter receives and a more affordable cost of care. Thank you for your time today.
Bisnat, Monsieur Dupuis, pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Dupuis, 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of Parliament. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting the FCFA to testify on Bill C-35 and to speak to you about the major issues facing early childhood education in French. With me today is Jean-Luc Racine, Executive Director of the Commission Nationale des Parents Francophones, a member organization of the FCFA. We're here today on behalf of 2.8 million French-speaking Canadians who live in a minority situation in 9 provinces and 3 territories, and more specifically to speak to you about 141,000 children aged 0 to 4 who, according to the last census, have the right to French language education in a minority setting under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We're here to give a voice to the parents of these children who often have to make heartbreaking choices because of the crying lack of French language daycare spaces. In some places, such as in Prince Edward Island, children can wait up to 3 years for a spot. For too many parents, there comes a time when they can't wait any longer. They may decide that one parent will stay at home, which impoverishes the family and helps perpetuate gender inequality. More often than not, they must resort to enrolling their children in an English language daycare. This choice, which is not a choice because, in fact, they have no choice, is made at the most crucial time in their child's development, the time when language and a sense of identity are being developed. Even if both parents are French-speaking, chances are that a child who attends daycare in English will be more comfortable in English than in French when he or she arrives at school. In many cases, his or her academic success will require that he or she continue schooling in English. Imagine the sense of failure that parents feel not having been able to ensure their child grows up in French. The lack of early childhood services in French is therefore a barrier to the exercise of the constitutional right to education in French in a minority setting. It's a factor of assimilation, and by the same token, it is a threat to the future vitality of Francophone minority communities. As I mentioned, there are 141,635 children entitled to French language education in a minority setting. However, the number of authorized French language daycare spaces can only serve 20% of these children. This means that in 80% of cases, in thousands of homes across the country, parents are having difficult conversations to resolve this dilemma. I will now turn the floor over to my colleague, Mr. Racine. Why is there a lack of early childhood services in French? The CNPF has submitted a brief to this committee that describes a problem and makes recommendations for solutions. Essentially, the problem lies with the agreements with the provinces and territories under the National Child Care Program. These agreements include language clauses, but the provincial and territorial action plans are vague and provide little guidance on access to French language childcare. This has led to situations, such as in Alberta, where only 19 of the 1,500 new childcare spaces will go to the Francophone community. In New Brunswick, the only officially bilingual province in the country, only 300 of the 1,900 spaces created will be in French. As currently drafted, Bill C-35 will increase the systemic inequalities that already exist. We know that this was not the intention of Parliament or the government. We know that you want the best for our children. That's why we are counting on the wisdom of this committee to make the 7 changes to the bill that we recommend in our brief. Our 3 main requests are: 1. Recognition of official language minority communities in the preamble, definitions, and other parts of the bill. 2. The inclusion in the funding guidelines of specific provisions to ensure the sustainability and growth of French language childcare services in the 9 provinces and 3 territories outside Quebec. 3. Have representation from Francophone minority communities on the Advisory Council. These changes would ensure that Francophones in all their diversity have a voice and are considered when decisions are made about early childhood services. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the federal budget unveiled a few days ago explicitly recognizes that our 2 official languages are not on equal footing and that the demographic weight of Francophone minority communities is eroding. You have in your hands with this bill the ability to make a difference for a whole generation of Francophone children. It is crucial that you grab this opportunity. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Racine.
Oui, c'est moi.
I am. Marie-Lou. Madame Deneau, that's correct. The floor is yours. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for inviting us to participate in this consultation. My name is Marie-Lou Deneau, Senior Advisor, Communications and Public Affairs at the Observatoire des Tout-Petits. I'm accompanied today by Krista Japel, Associate Professor in the Department of Specialized Education and Training at the Université du Québec à Montréal, and she'll be participating with us in the question period. Today, I will address 2 major concerns of the Observatoire's team that underscore the importance of some of the guiding principles of this bill. For us, it's essential to, 1, ensure the level of quality of services offered throughout the network based on scientifically recognized quality criteria And 2, improve access to quality childcare for the most vulnerable children. I'll now elaborate on each of these 2 aspects. Ensuring the level of quality of services offered throughout the network. Studies show that attendance at early childhood education services can have beneficial effects on child development and even reduce the gaps between children from advantaged and disadvantaged backgrounds when they enter kindergarten. However, in order to see these positive effects, childcare centers must meet certain quality standards. Given the rush to create spaces to meet the needs of families, we would like to repeat the importance of relying on the quality criteria recognized and documented in scientific literature. At this time, we believe there are 2 issues that can threaten the quality of services we provide to young children. First, the level of training of trained educators, which we feel has been reduced by the creation of the status of qualified temporary replacements. They have completed only 25 of the 91 training units of the child care techniques. Studies show that teachers with higher levels of training are more sensitive to children's needs, interact more with them, and provide better care and a variety of age-appropriate educational activities. Another issue is the question of staff turnover among educators, which emerged as one of the main concerns of parents in a recent ISQ survey on access to and the use of early childhood education. Children who are exposed to a greater number of staff changes are less engaged with adults and perform less well on language assessments. And the second concern, improvement of access to quality childcare for the most vulnerable toddlers. We all know that many children, over 32,000 in Quebec alone, are currently waiting for a place. We believe that some children deserve special attention. Children from disadvantaged backgrounds, those from immigrant families, and those with special support needs. These children are doubly vulnerable. They're the ones who live in the most difficult conditions and therefore would benefit the most from quality child care. Unfortunately, they are also the ones who often find themselves in lower quality settings. These children and their families face barriers. They could be geographic, financial, language, administrative. Services are sometimes not adapted to the needs of the child when the child has a particular conditions, or the schedule may not be adapted to the parent, for example, for those who work on nights or weekends. So we believe it's essential to take these barriers into account in existing settings as well as in the new spaces that will be created. I would also like to remind you that the proximity approach and collaboration with community organizations are documented strategies to better reach children from the most vulnerable families. Also, the difficulties families have in accessing spaces at this time lead children to change daycare services several times, which has consequences on the quality of the relationship they develop with their educator and on the stimulation they receive from the very different environments. According to a survey, the proportion of children who are vulnerable or in at least one area of development when they arrive at school is greater amongst those who have attended 3 or 4 more child care settings. In closing, we hope that the issues raised today will be considered in the work that you're doing. I'd like to conclude by emphasizing the importance of investing in the development of nonprofit services, of having networks developed by the provinces, measure their quality, and document the effectiveness of the strategies used to reach vulnerable families. Thank you.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madame Deneau.
Open the floor for questions. Begin, and I would ask each member to please identify who they're directing their question to. We'll now begin with Madame Ferrari for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses here at HUMA to discuss Bill C-35. Lots to learn, lots to take in and consider as we strengthen this bill and try to close the gaps. If I could start with Ms. Bisnath, I found your testimony quite interesting, and I know there's been a lot of parents crying publicly, both metaphorically but also literally, because they cannot access childcare. It's they've likened it to winning the lottery if you do get a space in the $10 a day childcare. And you talked a lot about the way that the bill is currently written as non-inclusive. There's kind of winners and losers. perhaps an unintended consequence of the bill, but it's what's happening. If you don't have a spot, you just don't get access to childcare. We have multiple families sharing that they actually cannot go back to work. Women actually can't go back to work. It's actually hurting women more than it's helping women. You spoke about women entrepreneurs, winners and losers, non-inclusive, and including everybody and the choice. One of the major pushbacks I hear is that there is concern that children are not for profit, that by opening up this bill to include everyone, that people will profit from children. Can you expand on that concern from some people in the sector?
Hi, thank you. So I guess what I can say to that is from our perspective, home childcare providers who are independent or unlicensed and not part of, a not-for-profit or not part of a licensed system are not making a profit. They're earning a salary. So it's two different things. They're not bringing in so much money that it's a profit. They're self-employed, they're entrepreneurs, they're making a livable wage, a salary, doing work that is meaningful to them, meaningful to their community, providing services to the children in their areas and their neighborhoods. And yes, earning an income so that they can be self-sufficient, economically independent, support their own children, their own families. So in that sense, if we could find a way to include these home childcare entrepreneurs, perhaps with direct licensing or some other mechanism, it would open access to so many families to be able to have a spot under the CWELC plan.
I agree with you in what I've heard. Thank you for that. I'm curious what you know in terms of the wait lists, if there are any that you know of people who are looking for childcare that can't access it. When we look at the capacity, that seems to be a major consequence of this bill. It's increased demand when there was already wait lists to start with.
So for the most part, that's out of our realm of experience. We don't really keep track of wait lists for licensed childcare or for any childcare, but from what I can say is, as I talk to parents regularly who are looking for childcare, who are desperate for childcare, who, are looking for at any avenue to find care that they need for their child. And I see, through social media and just in talking with the public and talking with people in our network, that they're searching months and months in advance, sometimes still cannot get a spot. And we just know that access, here in Ottawa and in other places across Ontario is very limited.
Yeah, thank you for that. And if I may, just to come back to your quote from, I believe it was a neuroscientist, the doctor,
yes,
about the quality of care. I think that's one of the big concerns too from people if we open up or try to put forth an amendment to include more, because right now it is an exclusive bill. And whether it's intended to be or not, it's just cutting out a lot of people. But how do you ensure to people that the child's welfare, their safety, both physically and psychologically, will be a priority if you open it up to all childcare providers and let parents choose what's best for their children?
So we feel that the home childcare providers are accountable to the parents and to their communities. So parents know what kind of experience their child is having. And we know that, there's a good quality and poor quality in all sectors, just as there is in all professions, and that a license, doesn't necessarily equal quality childcare. Quality is so much more than just a piece of paper or a checklist. It's, the relationship that's formed between the parent and the provider, this partnership that's based on mutual respect and that centers around the care of the child. So
thank you for that.
That's how we.
I have 30 seconds left, so thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out, and I believe it was Ms. Deneau talking about, stability for the child and having those multiple caregivers. And you can kind of see the cross-section here of what Ms. Bisnath is saying of these providers, and that you can see that there is the ability to have stability, too, if you are investing in and opening up that access. As well, I just want to touch on Mr. Jean-Luc and Hélène. Thank you for your testimony as well. It was insightful, I think, to hear about the unintended consequence, too, of the access to care. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for your advocacy for this bill.
Thank you. Madame Sachs, pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses who have participated today. My first question will be for the Fédération des communautés francophones et canadiennes du Canada, Mr. Racine and Mr. Dupuis. What is the importance to the Francophone communities in a minority setting to have access to these services, that is early childhood care, particularly in French? Indeed, it's crucial. The capacity or the ability to be Francophone and continue to be Francophone in all Canadian provinces and territories depends on fair access to French childcare centres. We've done significant work over the past generation to increase access to French schools throughout the country. We have now 740 schools in minority settings. We have our rights that are granted under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But to have access to these schools, they have to start their first years off in French. And often, because of a lack of access, they cannot do this. The first years of their life, where language is being developed, is so important. And if they don't go to childcare in French, they're not going to be able to pursue their education in French. So it's absolutely essential that we have this. And unfortunately, this bill does not specify that we need to guarantee spaces in French on a fair basis throughout the provinces and territories. And we have to ensure that the money that's transferred from the federal government to the provincial government will, in fact, bear in mind the scarcity of spaces in French. There are more than 9,000 spaces that are missing throughout the country. So right now, the bill does refer to programs that are being celebrated throughout the country, but we have to qualify what are the obligations for funding French child care centres in the various provinces and territories, and also consider having a Francophone representative on the advisory board. Thank you. And do you wish to add anything, Mr. Racine? Just to add to what was already said, we have to consider the assimilation of Francophones. Often this starts at an early age. I have many testimonies that talk about that are from parents in New Brunswick who've had to place their children in an English-speaking child care center. So these are two Francophones. But they realized that their child was not developing French language properly. The specialist that the child was sent to realized it wasn't a question of a lack of skill. It was because the child was in an English-speaking center and was not learning to developing the French properly. That's why we're asking that we have in this bill some recognition of the importance of having French child care centers in for Francophone communities in minority centers. So that is what we were proposing. Thank you very much, Mr. Racine, Mr. Dupuis. And as a parent, well, my first language is Hebrew, so it's very difficult to have my daughter speak Hebrew.
So I understand how important it is to maintain a culture and language. Pour moi, mon français est mon quatrième langue.
French is my fourth language, so I apologize.
Me to Marie-Lou Deneau and Fondation Lucie. Your organization's mission is to prevent poverty by contributing to the creation of conditions conducive to the development of the full potential of all young people living in Quebec. And drawing on the experience of Quebec, which we have 25 years to look at, which is really quite amazing in planning out this nationwide high-quality universal childcare system. Can you speak to how affordable, high-quality, and inclusive childcare is essential to the healthy development of young people? You did mention in your opening remarks about the science and the evidence behind it. I had the opportunity to meet with the team at Saint-Justin earlier in the year and received a lot of evidence there, but I'd like to hear from Fondation Lucie if possible, either from Madame Japel or from Madame Deneau. With 1 minute to go.
OK. Oui, d'accord. Donc, vous...
Okay, so you'd like to understand the impact of having proper childcare centers and the impact on poverty in Quebec. Is that what you're asking? You're asking us whether we've seen the impact on poverty. Absolutely. Childcare services, well, we have seen since we started offering these services, we've seen an increase in the number of women in the job market. It's been exponential. And if we compare our numbers, I think we went from 66 to 80% of women who are now in the workforce. If we compare this to Ontario, it's only gone up to 70% for the same period of time. Same thing. We have seen the impact on families who are living below the poverty line. So as childcare services expand, they can get out of poverty. So this is a very strong reason for having these centers. Could I add to that? Yes, go ahead. Because, yes, this is true. The family policy had as its initial objective to support families with this challenge of this work-family balance. And it's been a success. Indeed, it has. But as far as access to childcare services and quality of services are concerned, we still have work to do. So if we take Quebec as an example, this is a model. Mrs. Chappelle?
For time, you may want to continue on with another in an answer to another question. Madame Bérubé, pour
Madame Bérubé, you have 6 minutes. Microphone, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank all of the witnesses who are coming here before the committee. It's important to hear their testimony with respect to the bill. I would also like to thank our interpreters because without them, this communication would not be possible. I have a question for the Fondation Lucie and André Chagnon. Could you, going back to what you said earlier, what do you mean by the quality of services for childcare and how can it be measured? Krista, I will turn the floor over to you. If I may, I would like to answer your very general question quickly, or comprehensive question, rather. The quality of childcare services, this is, in research, we talk about the structural quality, which is the ratio, the qualifications of the staff, and we're talking about the quality of the process. What is happening between the staff and the children, the quality of the interactions between the children and the staff and the parents. So there are a lot of different ways of looking at this. There are measurements. I don't know how much time I have, but we have 2 measurements that we use a great deal in North America. We have the Ecker scale, which deals with the preschool environment, and the classroom assessment scale. And these are instruments or assessment instruments that enable us, and bearing in mind the Ecker scale, we have a whole list of issues that we look at, the activities that are planned, the interactions, the schedules, the daily schedules, and the class This is a tool which enables us to look at the interactions and all of the general environment, which is very important to consider. Does that answer your question? Or do I still have time to speak? Madame Deneau, did you wish to add to that, if you would like? And in our research, we decided to focus on the Ecker scale because it enables us, and I mustn't forget, growing up with a quality setting, which was developed by a Quebec ministry. We decided to focus on the Ecker scale for the simple reason that, first of all, it was translated into French. It has been validated, and it enables us to compare ourselves to all other kinds of countries. European countries use this scale. The United States does. Perhaps in Western Canada, the scale is used as well. These are scales that are regularly updated to be better targeted, and these scales, and I use this scale to improve quality because we have to bear in mind things that can be observed, things that are not necessarily observed. So we can assess a progress by changing one factor, and this scale is like Maslow's pyramid. And Thelma Harms, one of the three authors of this scale, I really liked the way she defined qualitative. She said that you have to start from the needs of the child. Children from all countries have the same needs. They have to be able to grow up in an environment that guarantees their security, safety, and interactions with others, to have adults surrounding them who are sensitive to their needs and who meet their needs. And finally, learning to speak the language, to developing all kinds of skills that correspond to the capacity of the child. It's very simplistic, but generally speaking, that's what it's all about. Could you talk about the agreements between the not-for-profits and the profits? Well, in this study, in international studies and in the studies that we've conducted here in Quebec, the longitudinal study on childhood development and the two studies on growing inequality have shown that there are gaps between not-for-profits and for-profit child care centers, and we always wonder why. Non-profits want for-profits want to make a profit, and how do they make their profit? Because they employ. Do they employ educators who are less trained, so their salaries aren't as high? And do they cut corners when they purchase equipment, educational equipment? So that explains why there's such a gap between the profits and the not-for-profits. Thank you, Madame Chappelle.
For 6 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Chair. My first question is for Monsieur Dupuis or Racine. So in Winnipeg, where I represent a community called Winnipeg Centre, it's right next door to St. Boniface, where we have an absolutely rich Franco-Manitoban community, very much tied to the Métis community, in fact, of Manitoba. And I'm wondering, and certainly the French language the way that it's been been maintained in St. Boniface, that's very much an Anglo city outside of St. Boniface, is pretty marvelous. And I'm just wondering, how can Bill C-35 be amended to better reflect the unique childcare needs of official language minority communities or even language minority communities?
Our brief refers to 7 different changes. I'll focus on 2. First of all, Section 8. Section 8 talks about the financial language, and it's very important to add an element to include the fact that there will be financial engagement for minority setting groups. Too often, not only for early childhood, but for other sectors as well, the federal government's finance services, but their services aren't given to the minority setting groups because they're, for example, Francophones in New Brunswick represent 33% of the population, but they only have access to 15% of the new childcare spots. So the federal law act has to specify that there will be financial funding given based on, to some extent, the demographics. We have to invest more. And secondly, Section 11 of the Act, which refers to the National Advisory Body, we would like at least one person of the 10 to 18 representatives on this board who represent Francophone communities in minority settings, because we have to ensure that the reality of Francophones who live outside of Quebec are representative in this body, which will look after the next transfers of funding. And perhaps I would add to that is that my colleague Ellen mentioned the first modification in particular. We've done a lot of studies of studies in 2021, and when there's no financial commitment, the provinces invest almost zero. So we always need to have a commitment. For example, in British Columbia, the government said that it would spend $50,000 million for the First Nations, but for Francophones, the only commitment was we'll consult. So the bill itself in C-35 has to have strong sections on funding, stating that these minority setting groups will be respected.
This question is for Dr. Japel. You wrote an article in 2021 that the non-profit childcare centres, the CPAs, are, in quotes, the jewel in the crown of Quebec's childcare system. And you've also written that for-profit childcare is, in quotes, less likely to deliver the levels of quality needed to foster children's development, school readiness, and well-being. Can you please expand on that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I really wrote that it's the jewel in the crown, because we are still struggling with the CPE because they had so many cutbacks. They're always that. I mean, we can say they're better than the for-profits in terms of quality. And with regards to school readiness, if I understand right, that was your other question. We've noticed that children who were in the CPE had an advantage. Problem is that the children who need the most this kind of a setting are underrepresented. That is, vulnerable populations are less likely to have a space in the CPE. And so that effect that the CPE could have for their school readiness is very, very weak, because they are not in very good settings. I did a study about pre-kindergarten. You know, we have full-time pre-kindergarten now, and I wanted to see if the quality of the pre-kindergarten did have an impact on school readiness in a population of children from socially disadvantaged backgrounds. And I realized most of them were 20% were not in childcare before going to maternelle 5 ans. And those who were in childcare, a very small proportion was in a CPE, and the others were in for-profit and family-based care. And we have seen in our studies within the Quebec longitudinal study that quality, which is interesting, quality, if you look at upper socioeconomic class and a lower socioeconomic class, and you look at the quality of the CPEs, they're not very different. But if you go into for-profit daycares, they're lower. And there is a big quality difference, or home-based care, big quality difference. So what I'm saying is, I mean, we need to work on creating more CPEs and coming back to access, get the children who most benefit from these better settings to be there, because that will narrow the gap. The gap is still there between children
Is
from
that it?
affluent
Oh,
houses.
so I
No,
think.
Madame, because we're
Oh,
well
that's
over
it. Sorry,
the
I've been cut
timeline.
off. Sorry.
Miss.
Did it answer your question?
Yes, I'll ask next round.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yes, we're
Okay.
well over to 6. So Ms. Gray for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. My first questions today are for Madame Deneau. And first of all, you had referenced some studies in your testimony today, and I'm wondering if you would be able to table those studies, in particular the one on stability, for this committee.
Oui, avec plaisir.
I'd be happy to do so. This is a crossover of. Do you want me to answer right away, or?
Just table those studies. That would be really great. My time is limited, so I've got a
My
few
pleasure.
questions to run
My
through here.
pleasure.
Thank you kindly. You had talked about in your opening statement about families needing spaces in childcare, and I represent a community in British Columbia, and what I've heard from operators in my province is that presently they're really struggling to meet the demand from parents looking for spots for their children. And an operator in my community wrote recently and said, and I'll quote her here, she says, quote, "People who can afford it do not give up their spaces," unquote. And then she went into a description of, for example, maybe someone that has acquired a space, they're on maternity leave, they want to keep their spaces, and in fact, they're not being utilized. So do you hear similar situations in your province?
Krista, est-ce que tu...
Krista, have you seen that? If I understood.
That parents don't give up spaces?
Yes, that's the question. Where they're paying the fee,
Yep.
which is lower than they normally would previously, and they don't want to give up the space. So
Well,
therefore
that
they're holding the
happens, sure,
space and
that
paying
happens.
for it.
Yeah, because if you lose that space, the child has to be there. We have monitoring for presence. You can't just pay for the space and not send your child to childcare, because that would be really unjust for people who are waiting. Okay. But there are people who pay full, and then the child isn't always there. But there is, I think there's a tolerance level to how much the children can be absent, because it could be an abuse of a low contribution space.
Right, and these are in fact are children that may not actually even be there yet, but their number has come up, and so they have the space, and so they're paying for it, but the child's actually not there.
Oh, even before the child gets there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would have to check into that. I'm not sure
Okay.
if that's a practice that.
Thank you, but there are other
is-
times where they're technically not, is what you're saying. But I appreciate that. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions for Ms. Bisnath, and you had mentioned, of course, that there's such a need for childcare, and a couple of quick examples. I was talking to someone in my community where there's 2 doctors that are looking to move to Canada, and they're they're considering, they're going through all the immigration processes and they're almost at the end, but they're considering not because they've realized that there's no childcare spaces for when they actually move here. And one other example I'll give is a childcare operator in my riding expressed frustration on how governments have, and I'm going to quote her exactly here, quote, shown a total lack of responsibility for removing roadblocks in certifying educators, retraining them, and licensing facilities, unquote, causing further backlogs. So my question is, we know that the government has said that they're looking to hire 40,000, or there's a need to hire 40,000 new childcare workers across Canada in the next 3 years to meet their targets. And so my question is, to meet this demand, various streams will have to be used. There's schooling, there's training, there's immigration, all of those things take time. So based on your experience, do you see this as as being feasible to achieve on the current actions that are being taken?
Sorry, you're asking if it's feasible that they come up with all of those educators?
Yeah, that there'll be 40,000
required?
educators. It's actually less than 3 years now.
I can't speak from a place of evidence, but just anecdotally and, from my own experience and our experience as an organization, it seems highly unlikely. There are staffing shortages, certainly across Ontario, but across Canada as well. And from our perspective with home childcare, we have been long advocating for direct licensing or an individual licensing, some sort of process that would make it easier and more likely for individuals to get licensed. I know in other provinces across the country, they do have that type of option. But for us here in Ontario, it's definitely a barrier. If that barrier was removed, it would open up, access to educators and also access to childcare spaces.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Thank you, Ms. Who we got here? Denault tonight? Bisnat. Mr. Collins for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for attending this afternoon. We received some incredible testimony today, and it mirrors a lot of what we've heard from other witnesses who've been before the committee on the same subject matter. I want to start by saying, first and foremost, I've had the opportunity to tour many daycares or licensed facilities in my childcare facilities in my riding and in my city of Hamilton. And, I think in the early days, we've seen some tremendous success. And so far, I think we've had 96% buy-in from operators in terms of signing onto the system. And I think early numbers are, and this is from a staff report in Hamilton, that we've seen some big savings in terms of $3,600 in childcare fees in 2022 and an average savings of $9,100 for families in Hamilton this year. So incredible success in the early days. And, my fear is going through this is that we have some reluctant dance partners with some of our provincial partners. And it speaks to, I think, to, some of what Mrs. Deneau talked about earlier in her opening comment in terms of, there has to be standards, there has to be a high level of training. With that higher level of training comes a high level of service. I think I'm using your words, Ms. Deneau, but I did want to speak to you about that in terms of the advantages that we have with licensed childcare facilities. And so we've heard a lot of testimony about the importance of nonprofit providers in terms of having a license. And I, as a longtime municipal councillor, I know that those licenses actually mean something. It's a minimum level standard of care. And so there are inspections that are tied to those licenses. And so for me as a parent, when I had my children in a facility in Hamilton that was nonprofit, that was licensed, I knew that they were getting quality care. And I knew that the ECEs that were operating in that facility went to school for that. They were highly trained. And you talked about the units that need to be completed and how important they are for the child's development. And I think to give the family a sense of safety in terms of knowing that when they drop their child off, they are getting quality care. So along those lines, if I could ask you to elaborate on your first point. You talked about the high-level training, and back to the reluctant dance partner that I talked about. I'm very concerned that the provinces may not, or here in Ontario especially, may not be as committed to building capacity in the system, putting people through our colleges who offer these certificates and certification, how do you see us building capacity, knowing that through COVID, there are thousands of vacant positions in the sector, and we're still recovering from that. But here we are offering a service, and we know that we're going to need new positions on top of those that we lost prior to the pandemic or during the pandemic. So sorry for that preamble there. I had to get that out, and just in terms of giving context of where I am in Hamilton and where we are in the province of Ontario. But how do we build capacity under a very strained system right now where we may have provinces that aren't that committed to doing so?
I fully agree with you. It's a challenge. The workforce scarcity in Quebec is a problem in childcare center, and during the pandemic, we had they decided to accept educators that weren't fully trained by improving work conditions of educators that will, and allowing them to catch up salary-wise. These are all issues that have to be addressed. Their salaries need to be increased, and I think that will make it more attractive for people to work in this sector. And to go back to your comment on not-for-profits and for-profits, studies show that if the level of qualified staff in the non-profits is 93%, whereas in the society, only 49%. So there's a difference of almost 50%, and that's a real issue.
Just to wrap up, and I'm running out of time here, but one last question. I guess, when you compare the two services that are offered, I think you've painted a picture today that parents and children would get a higher quality of care in a licensed nonprofit facility than they would an unlicensed facility or for-profit facility. Is that a correct statement to make?
Oui, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. That's what Quebec studies have shown.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Madame Bérubé pour...
Ms. Bérubé, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Racine and Mr. Dupuis. You talked about sections 8 and 11 in the bill. In your opinion, what is the most important amendment that you'd like to see made to Bill C-35? It would be the section on the funding. If there's no funding commitments made in the framework agreement, then there will be no services. Why is there such a different treatment for Francophone childcares? I think that we have very special needs. Our Francophone communities are very different from the Anglophone communities. For us, it's easy to see how we need that we want to have Anglophone children who progressively become bilingual. But that's something that we don't see on the French side. So we have to support the sector. I know that we don't have very much time, but I have so many examples to illustrate what I'm trying to say. So I'm just saying, just why do you want to include Francophones? If we're not in the bill, we won't be given any consideration. I can tell you that the agreements are about to expire. Once they expired, they'll be renegotiated by new governments, and they will go back to this bill. And if the bill contains obligations to Francophones, well, that's absolutely essential. Thank you. One final question. The labor shortage is present throughout the country. Why do you feel that Francophone needs are more pressing than others? You know that the market is much smaller So when there are educators that leave, it's very difficult to replace them. So in BC, child cares have shut down because there haven't been enough educators. It's very difficult.
Madame Gazan, to conclude this round for 2.5 minutes. Ms. Gazan?
Thank you so much. Going back to you, Dr. Japel, I think, one of my concerns in terms of licensing is that, there needs to be a certain standards in place. I'm an early childhood educator in my former life and then a trained teacher, and we had a set curriculum in both, and both public, and our funding was dependent on teaching the curriculum. So it was mandated. Is that part of the issue in terms of actually having greater regulation to ensure that children have the same level of quality and education? I think because people often confuse childcare with babysitting, and it's not. It's early childhood education. Is that part of the issue, would you say?
Well, I think, in Quebec, we have a program, Accueillir la petite enfance, and it should be implemented. It should be used in every setting, whether it's for-profit, not-for-profit, or home-based care. But I think, the rules and regulations could be a little bit more precise to have parameters that guarantee more quality. I'm just thinking about, the amount of space that's allocated for a child from 3 to 5 in a center-based place. It's 3.75 square meters per child. And that includes movable furniture. Now, we live in a country where we have 6 months of winter, and it is not enough. I mean, I'm talking about things like that, which are really important. Do we have to have a courtyard for the children? Not necessarily. If there's a park 500 meters away, that'll do, which is also, these are all quality elements. But
quality control, like, for example, in an early childhood care center, you have to have things like a sand table, a certain amount of manipulatives out, a certain amount of books, so that you can teach a curriculum. When it's not regulated,
there is no. What do you do? Yeah.
It's a is that a problem?
Agree. It is a problem, and I think a curriculum also makes sure that we are providing activities that foster the global development, and also what we need in terms of material. And people need to be guided, and a lot of people don't have that training. They are nice people. I'm not saying that they're bad people, but they don't have the training.
Thank you, Madame Chapelle and Ms. Gazan. That concludes the first hour. I want to thank the witnesses for coming back again and giving your testimony to this committee on an important piece of legislation, as you so clearly articulate. So again, thank you. Committee members will suspend for a few moments while we get ready for the next group of panelists. Again, thank you so much for coming. Merci beaucoup à tous. I will remind those, excuse me, appearing in the room and virtually that you can choose the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. In the room, use the microphone that's attached to you. Those appearing virtually, you can choose that with the icon at the bottom of your surface. If we lose interpretation services, please get my attention. We'll suspend while it's being corrected. I remind those new members, no screenshots of the proceedings of the committee in the room. And please wait until I recognize you by name before you begin to speak. And at this time, I'll also remind committee members that when you're posing a question, please identify which witness you wish your question to be directed to. We'll begin with introducing Kim Hiscott, Executive Director, Andrew Fleck, Children's Services, Marnie Flaherty, good name, Canadian Child Care Federation, Acting Chief Executive Officer, and Maggie Moser, Ontario Association of Independent Children's Centres. We will begin with Ms. Hiscott you're in the room. For 5 minutes, Ms. Hiscott, welcome to the committee, and you would have 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before this committee. I'm the Executive Director of Andrew Fleck Children's Services, a multi-site, multi-service, not-for-profit agency here in Ottawa, and this commitment to early learning is something I've dreamed about for decades. The generational long-term influence on children and families will support Canada beyond what we can even imagine, and I echo the comments from others that Bill C-35 can be strengthened by adding a robust, clear definition of early learning and childcare. Andrew Fleck Children's Services has been around since 1911. We have a licensed capacity of over 3,000 spaces between our group sites and home childcare. And when we shared with our families that our fees would be reduced, the relief was palatable. We heard stories like these. We haven't been able to save for a house since my child started at childcare. It was almost as much as my rent. We thought we definitely would not be able to afford to have another child either. This will change our lives so very much that we finally don't feel like we are drowning just to have quality care, since we cannot afford to stay home either. But as you know, affordability is only one component of respecting early learning and childcare in Canada, and I would like to focus on what else we need to pay attention to: appropriately compensating and supporting early childhood educators, expansion of the not-for-profit licensed childcare, and modernization of licensed home childcare. And I did submit a brief that expands on these points. For decades, not-for-profits have kept our parent fees as low as possible to support families and the affordability of licensed childcare. This came at the expense of the dedicated individuals working with children and those that support them. With 80 to 85% of our budgets attributed to compensation, we know that employees have subsidized the sector, and we are now experiencing the consequences of this approach. Not only are fewer individuals interested in obtaining their credentials, committed, experienced educators are leaving for other opportunities. We have models in Ontario and likely elsewhere where the role of early child educator has been appropriately evaluated through a robust job evaluation process, comparing the scope, breadth, and depth of responsibilities of the role with comparators. It is appropriate and necessary to look to post-secondary institutions and municipalities that directly operate licensed childcare and replicate their compensation packages, including benefits and pensions. Factors that inspire early child educators to remain in the sector, such as programming time, professional learning, etc., are also necessary alongside appropriate compensation, but not instead of. Other current or proposed solutions to address our labour crisis without addressing compensation are destined to fail. There are already numerous examples of programs that are not at their allowable license capacity due to the lack of available employees, and the problem is expected to get worse. As we look to expand access to early learning, we know that finding qualified employees will be our biggest barrier. But being optimistic and expecting that compensation issues will be addressed, expansion of our services will be necessary because our current waiting lists are already very, very long. I urge the government to strengthen its expectations that all federal investment should be focused on expansion in the not-for-profit sector. Public funding must be viewed as an investment to create long-term sustainable community assets. A federal lending program, either directly or through a third party, that not only offers financing at reasonable lending rates, but also supports not-for-profits through the complicated construction or leasehold negotiation process is also necessary. Not-for-profits can and will expand. They can and are responsive to their communities, and they often work with other community agencies like Services for Seniors or Housing to greater benefit neighbourhoods. And now for modernization of licensed home childcare. Currently in Ontario, there are two options for home childcare: licensed and unlicensed. Both include the individual provider being self-employed, but only licensed care includes oversight and monitoring and CWELC eligibility, so parent fees are affordable. Licensed home child care must be a component of a national system with its flexibility of hours, including evenings and weekends, and may be the most viable option in smaller communities. The licensed agency model is key to supporting quality. The federal government should separately and in great detail review compensation options that agencies can offer to these small business owners, including how to access benefits, and ensuring that providers are able to retain their self-employed status. If we do not embrace licensed home childcare, the agency model, and self-employed providers, we will be perpetuating a two-tiered system where families who can choose center-based care because the operating hours fit with their schedules have access to affordable childcare, while those who need flexible hours offered by home childcare don't. It's likely that job seekers will make choices based on affordable access to childcare, meaning that we may unintentionally exacerbate a workforce crisis in some sectors due to the lack of childcare access. The Canada-wide Early Learning Childcare Plan is overall a welcome direction for our country and for all Canadians. It makes sense that it will take conversations with all of us, including those directly delivering services, to get this right. Bill C-35 is a positive direction. Let's make sure it has the teeth needed so all expectations can be met. Thank you.
Ms. Flaherty for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I speak to you today as the interim CEO of the Canadian Childcare Federation, an organization representing childcare affiliates and members from across Canada. Canada's largest national nonprofit charitable organization supporting childcare in research and policy. Since 1983, we have been giving voice to the knowledge, practice, and passion of early learning professionals and practitioners across Canada. I know my time is limited today before the committee, and the Federation has submitted a detailed written submission on recommendations to your committee's study on Bill C-35, an act representing early learning and childcare in Canada. Today, I would like to focus on a key point. The current childcare landscape in Canada is a mix of private, public, and not-for-profit operators. The government has made it clear that all new growth in childcare be primarily in the not-for-profit and public sector. The Federation strongly endorses publicly managed. All regulated childcare services must be organized, funded, and delivered in a way that put the best interests of children and families first. This should be the core requirement for all services that receive public funding. Childcare is a public good that brings significant benefits to all of society in much the same way as our more developed public education and public health system. We are in the early days of this rollout. This is a huge transformational change, and it'll take time to collect data, build the system, and ensure recruitment and retention strategies for early childhood educators. Our ECEs are the backbone of this system. The Federation welcomes the transformational change. Why? Because today, early childhood education in Canada is an uneven patchwork. It is unavailable in many communities. Waitlists are long. The quality of programs is uneven, and for many parents, quality licensed childcare remains unaffordable and not accessible. We would further recommend that within Bill C-35, funding be explicitly described as annualized and tied to the licensed regulated system of childcare, which includes center-based and home childcare. We applaud the government for their commitment to a national plan. Let me be clear, the Federation believes and supports Bill C-35. We recommend that there be deeper consideration and directions in two areas: workforce development and quality for children. Let me speak to workforce, our ECEs. The success of the new plan is only possible with a well-trained, valued, and compensated early childhood educator workforce. This includes educators working in center-based and in licensed home childcare, a critical and often poorly understood part of the childcare system. We would like to see strong language in the bill that promotes sustained investment in a national strategy for the recruitment, education, and retention of early childhood educators workforce. We need to establish national standards for competitive wages and national education and credentialing standards for ECEs. We also need foreign credential recognition that supports high quality programs and accelerates entries of new coming interested and able to work in Canada. I would like to highlight three more very important points. One, the Federation believes in the critical importance of language in the proposed act to ensure accountability through the annual federal public report on progress. Number two, that the Federation would like the act to clearly stipulate that there be Canadian-based early learning and childcare research across a range of disciplines and methodologies. We need research into many areas, including early learning and childcare for immigrant children, children with special needs, children from official minority language communities, and Indigenous children. Number three, we support the National Advisory on Early Learning and Childcare and enshrining this advisory body into law. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about Bill C-35. The Canadian Childcare Federation fully supports this critical piece of legislation. We believe in the goal of the federal government to provide a Canada-wide quality and affordable early learning and childcare system. The Federation, all the early childhood professionals and practitioners that we speak for look forward to continue to the work together with our government partners to realize the transformative system for children and families. Thank you for your time.
Okay, and Ms. Mother for 5 minutes.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Maggie Moser. I'm a member of the board of the Ontario Association of Independent Childcare Centres, which represents the small business owners, mainly women, of for-profit licensed childcare centres. These centres are not home childcare centres, but rather larger facilities, which comprise about 30% of all licensed childcare spots in Ontario. The CWELC program has not delivered good value for taxpayers and does not meet Canadian standards of equity. The implementation provides undue benefits to higher income families who are sailing their yachts the tides of the program, while those who need it most are left drowning. Lower income families were excluded from obtaining access to the CWELC childcare spots. Families who could already afford the fees of their centre were the ones who benefited from the rebates and discounts, while the rest were left behind on a long wait list. The program created a systemic barrier to lower income families and thus also to racialized groups. Public funding is not being used for the stated purpose, a solution for the She Session and to make possible for women to return to work and also boost our economy. The original intent is not being carried out. Based on wait lists, it could take 2 to 3 years at least to achieve what should have been the main objective, to provide lower costs of childcare to those who most need it, and thus facilitate a return to work for these women. The program adds many costly layers of administration, diverting funds from reaching families. The complexity and costs of flowing money through complicated cost-based formulas to centers, who then fund parents through discounted fees, adds even more administration, which wastes valuable resources. Our members, mainly female small business owners, have been asked to provide their centers' facilities for the use of the CWELC system without recognition of the investments and sweat equity they have made at a time when the government was not creating the childcare needed. Many of these centers have never received any government funding and have invested their life savings into their childcare centers while being lumped into a category together with large corporate chains. We ask they be treated fairly and with respect for their historic contribution. Licensed childcare centers across Canada, profit and nonprofit, have been facing hardship under the CWELC program, and many are being taken over by large corporate chains. Centers going out of business are not being purchased by the public sector. This does not benefit families, does not strengthen the system, does not increase the stated goal of maintaining mainly nonprofit, and does not further the goal of raising the quality of childcare in Canada. We need a national program which overcomes these biased, discriminatory, and fiscally irresponsible factors. We respectfully ask that funding of this program be reallocated to the following. Increase the funding and expand the income range to the existing subsidy system to increase the number of lower and middle income families who receive full or partial subsidy. Adequately fund the building of new centers, which will create downward pressure on fees and enable more women to go back to work. increase the amount which can be deducted from income taxes so that parents can deduct the full costs of the childcare they pay. Recognize that for a woman to go back to work, childcare fees is the cost of doing business so that they can go back into the workforce. Recognize the extreme pressure on staffing created mostly from inflation and the pressure created through the increased demand now for high quality early childhood educators. The amounts allocated for specific staff wage increases are inadequate and insulting to the staff who kept our economy going throughout COVID. And we see the resulting great shortages of staff, both ECEs and assistants across the child care sector. We certainly support a workforce strategy to raise salaries. Please recognize the contribution of independent small businesses in providing licensed childcare at a time when childcare was desperately needed over the years, and ensure that funding is structured to support for-profit small businesses. Thank you for your time. I welcome your questions.
Well, sir, we will only have time for one round because I do need a bit of committee business time. So we will begin with Madame Ferrari for 6 minutes. I think we can get 6 minutes each person in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone today for your testimony on C35 and childcare in Canada. Ms. Moser, if I can start with you, can I ask you about your current wait lists? How many childcare centres do you oversee? How many spaces are there? And then how many parents are on wait lists?
Okay, so we have 147 spaces as well as 24 half-time spaces, going all the way from infant up to through kindergarten. Our center is 100% full. There is not one empty space in our center. At the moment, we have around 600 names on our wait list. This is for spots in the next year and a half. And it is a current list in that we ask our families to contact us every 6 months to maintain their registration. So if they haven't done that, we take them off the list so that we can maintain the list is only with families who are now looking for the next 18 months.
Thank you so much. What we've heard a lot is I think we just want to ensure that there is access. We've heard from a couple witnesses, affordability is one piece of the puzzle. It's not everything. It's really important. I know it was a really big decision and it was a huge cost for me. I mean, $10 daycare sounds wonderful. It is a wonderful idea. But I think the execution and the sustainability of it is where we want to really strengthen this piece of legislation. One of the pushbacks is that, you know, there seems to be a real divide between not-for-profit, public, and private. There seems to be a lot of division on this particular subject. Can you speak to the women that will be hurt because of the way the current bill is written, unintended consequence, as I've said before multiple times, the women entrepreneurs that you've seen or experienced that you can share with the committee?
Sure, certainly. So our members, OX members, are women, mostly women, who took a risk, opened up a child care center, took out loans, took out mortgages on their buildings, on their houses. It's very expensive. We're talking hundreds of thousands going into the millions to open a center. Mm-hmm. So these women, some of them recent immigrants who took their life savings and said, I'm going to open a center, like this is something I know how to do. And, you know, or people coming from an education background like myself, who was a teacher for 27 years before I opened my center. Generally speaking, the women that in our organization opened centers for a reason. They needed a center. They couldn't find childcare for their child. And I know for myself, I tried to open a nonprofit and I couldn't because I couldn't borrow $1 million. If I told the bank I wasn't making any money, they weren't going to lend me that money. So realistically, childcare has been needed and it has been provided by these women entrepreneurs who took the risk and stepped up and provided that care and have been providing that care and are carrying the loans, carrying the mortgages, and the unpaid labor and the sweat equity, and are now looking at possibly some of them, because funding is not recognizing those areas, they may lose their centers. We're
Thanks.
all constantly being
Thank you. I hate to cut you off.
Yeah.
We only have so much
approached. Yeah,
time.
that's okay.
But what could we add as an amendment into this bill that would include everyone, that wouldn't exclude, and especially one of the things that I've heard personally is women who've been able to flee domestic violence by opening up childcare, and that now this is going to impact them. What could we add as an amendment to help include more, to help fill that capacity and to stop that wait list?
Certainly for women who own centers right now is to make sure that the funding which will be provided to them through CWILC will include their facility cost, their loans, their unpaid equity, basically, which is what we call profit. So that chunk of money which would come from government putting into the building of a center has really come now from private, and it has to be recompensed, or they will just not continue. They can't operate as a nonprofit.
So just for clarification, because I know you have an economy background, in a not-for-profit or public, the money that is used, because you can't say for profit, but the money that comes into a not-for-profit or public is put back into the facility to maintain it, to operate it, and to fulfill operating costs. In a private, is it not that it's the own operators, they're putting their own money back into it? So they're both, I think there's a misconception that somebody's walking around with bags of money on the backs of children.
No, that's right. I mean, because in a not-for-profit organization, you have whole layers of administration which are doing exactly what the owner was doing, project managing the build, overseeing many aspects. They have skin in the game, so they're there more often. There's a higher level of oversight in that particular situation, and they're using public funds for buildings, existing buildings, or different pots of money. So if for instance was mentioned that their staff costs of a nonprofit are around 85%. So my facility cost is 15%, just monthly. So if I had 85% for my staff and 15% for my building, I wouldn't be able to feed the children. So that's why fees are higher in a for-profit center, because they have to cover all the things that government provides to nonprofits for free. The facility is there. The years of creating it, everything is already there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
So that's the difference.
Thank you, Ms. Moser. Madame Ferrari. Mr. Van Bynen for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I as well want to thank all the witnesses for their contribution in helping us make some decisions on how to go forward. It seems that we're continuing to hear recurring themes. One is capacity, the other is the quality of the service provided, and the differences between profit, not-for-profit, licensed and not licensed. My question is for Kim Hiscott, and that is there anything about Ontario's implementation that is preventing expansions coming to this capacity issue?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. There's a couple of things that are preventing. First off, there is our lack of staff, right? So we know that there are a great number of registered early childhood educators in Ontario. We have a College of ECEs that have left the sector and that would welcome returning if compensation was appropriate and reasonable. But the other big reason that not-for-profits would be hesitant right now to, or not able to expand, is exactly what Maggie said. Actually being able to borrow money as a not-for-profit to create a center is complicated. As I said, Andrew Fleck, we've been around for a long, long time, and we still find it very, very complicated, which is why I was urging that the federal government should look at a loan opportunity or some supports for not-for-profits, because we're ready to expand.
Thank you. That's interesting. As a 30-year banker, I can appreciate some of the hurdles that you face. Is the fact that the agreements prioritize not-for-profit growth a limited factor in space creation?
No, absolutely not. I don't think that's not the limiting factor at all. Again, not-for-profits are ready to expand and want to expand.
And is the not-for-profit sector ready to expand, acknowledging some of the limitations that we have with respect to the staffing and the training of the staff?
Very much. I mean, the biggest opportunity for a not-for-profit is to be responsive to your community, right? So you're sitting with your board of directors, you're looking at your waiting lists, and the board is saying, yes, we need to address our community needs. And so absolutely a not-for-profit would be ready to expand.
Great. Newfoundland and Labrador recently announced a $25 minimum wage for ECEs. And if Ontario did the same, what would that mean for your operations and future expansion?
Wouldn't help me. Our early childhood educators already start at $25, a little bit more actually. What I urge us to do is to not throw out numbers. I think that throwing out numbers, well, the wage should be 19 or 25 or 30 or match a school board or whatever, is actually doing us a disservice. I really think we need to look and do a job evaluation. What are the scope, depth, responsibilities of the role of the early childhood educator who is in ratio, and then determine what is that appropriate salary based on other comparators. You know, $25 an hour might sound wonderful to somebody who's currently making 19, but to somebody else who's not, we need to evaluate the job, value the job more appropriately.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chair, I'll cede the rest of my time to Mr. Collins.
It's in 36 seconds.
Oh, great. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, through you to Ms. Flaherty, with your 30 years experience that you have in the industry, I mean, I think you certainly know the pulse of where we're both from in Hamilton in terms of some of the issues that seem to be universal across the sector, and they've been mentioned here today many times in terms of the wage rates, in terms of the building capacity within the sector to accommodate demand. So, you know, your one line where you talked about ensure accountability on progress, I think was the one that caught my attention. And so can I ask you to comment on those issues that we know, you know, our service providers in Hamilton are facing, and as it relates to building capacity, the competition with the school board that was just mentioned by Ms. Hiscock in terms of wage rates, all those things wrapped up. You know, my concern is that the province isn't giving this the attention it deserves. Individual organizations have asked for a workforce strategy to deal with all of these issues, come up with a comprehensive plan. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, and it's so wonderful to see you around the table, and I'm very proud of spending 30 years in Hamilton and growing today's family. And in Hamilton, we were lucky to be part of the Best Start, and I'm not sure if years ago, the Best Start, 15 years, and there was a lot of data and support of smart growth in 3 different areas of our province. And I think there's a lot of data that we could probably learn a lot from if we can dig that out and find out what's the best way to move forward. Definitely working with the community, municipalities in Ontario are an excellent source of managing the childcare system, so that they know they can leverage, municipalities can leverage relationships with school boards within their cities and help us plan a comprehensive plan for early learning and childcare, utilizing schools to the capacity, utilizing municipal buildings to their capacity, and using, you know, other buildings that are our taxpayers' buildings that have already been built or can be retrofitted. So the investment stays in neighborhoods. As for the Canadian Child Care Federation, we do believe in publicly managed, and publicly funded. So even, with the not-for-profit versus profit factor, if we have strong agreements of how that money is going to be spent on wages, on perhaps a scale for rent or leasing, so that we have a really good understanding of what it really costs, and do that market study to make sure that people aren't taking advantage of public dollars. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we have some great examples in Ontario. In my opinion, I'm speaking for the Canadian Child Care Federation, but spent my life in Ontario, and I know we could make this happen.
Thank you, Ms. Flaherty. Mr. Collins. Madame Bérubé? Oui. Pour 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes, Ms. Berube. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. My question is for Ms. Hiscott. You talked about the importance of the bill, where you talked about having better definitions. Where exactly do you see this happening?
Thank you. I do understand French. Je comprends beaucoup, mais
I do understand French.
Question. I think right at the very beginning would make a lot of sense to have a really robust definition of how we're defining early learning and childcare. We don't want to mislead people or to imply that when we're talking about early learning and childcare, we're meaning those casual relationships between family members or other arrangements that families will make. What we're talking about is the licensed early learning and childcare system delivered by qualified early childhood educators, and or in the case of home childcare, where it's the agency model is supporting providers who are self-employed.
Merci. Ma question va être...
Thank you. Are there any other aspects that you would like to add to the bill C-35? My question is for the other witnesses.
Madame Flaherty?
Ms. Flaherty.
So the two highlights that we need to really look at quality and what it means, quality for children. So I think that should be added, and embedding the National Advisory Council into law so that we have a federal lens on the development of a national childcare strategy. So I know it's a 3-year thing right now, but it might be a good idea to embed it in law so that whatever happens in the future, we're looking at it from a federal lens, that our early childhood education system in Canada continues to grow and strengthen.
Flaherty?
Ms. Mauser?
Could you just repeat that again, your question?
I wanted to know, in your opinion, what are the priorities that should be added to Bill C-35?
I personally see the disparity between who is benefiting from it right now in terms of it is advantaging higher income families because they were already in the centers because they could afford it, and people of lower income are not actually benefiting from it right now. So given the purpose of the program, to me, I would like to see a way to make that change, whether it is directing more money towards, as part of CWELC, in expanding the subsidy system, for example, because it's just shouldn't be by chance that you happened to be on a wait list, because if you were lower income, you're not on that wait list. You're not on my wait list if you're lower income because you couldn't afford my fees. And people when they're pregnant, the day they get pregnant, they write and register. So it's going to be 2 years before the person who is of lower income is going to be able to access care. And maybe at that point, the child is 3 years old and they've already practically gone through most of the early years, the most expensive part of childcare. So people who are of lower middle income are not getting subsidy. Perhaps they don't qualify for subsidy right now because they make a little too much money to get subsidy, but they didn't make enough money to be on those lists for the daycares, childcare centers, which are getting CWELC funding to reduce fees. So to me, I see that this is backwards, that we're not using this money for where women really need to be able to get care and go back to work. And that bothers me as a taxpayer. And it also bothers me because I am using my center for the CWELC system because I believe in childcare so much. And even, if I lose some money because of doing that, I'm willing to do it. But I want people who really need the care to get it. So I think this has to be looked at very seriously by the committee, that right now the people getting the benefit of these millions of dollars are people who actually can afford where they are. I mean, probably not in all centers, but I'm just giving you my perspective from what I see, and many, many other people see, is that, there are winners and losers, but the winners are definitely people of higher income. So I can't tell you how to fix that, but I think it needs to be fixed.
So in addition to the definition, I would also like to add that there should be a stronger piece around the expectation around compensation, that early childhood educators should be valued for the role that they offer, and also that there should be this opportunity for federal funding for borrowing for expansion, a lending opportunity.
Okay, we're running a little low, unless you have a short question.
Generally speaking, what are the criteria that we could use to ensure that the members of the council will be able to represent diversity in the Canadian system?
It's an interesting question. I think already, short answer. Okay. I think that we continue to review then what the members of the council, who they are representing. So we continue to ensure that the members are representing not only the research but practice as well.
Scott and Madame Gazan for 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. We've heard a lot about difficulties in terms of expanding the child care system to actually be able to roll out a national child care strategy. And one of the central pieces that I'm seeing is a workforce that's willing to work in this industry because of poor pay, poor benefits. We know that it's problematic. And, sorry.
Unanimous consent from the committee to continue. Do we have unanimous consent to continue to about 5:30, 5:35? I believe it's a 30-minute bell.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. So because the bells are ringing and we do have to head into the House of Commons, I'd like to make the suggestion that any other questions that we have of the witnesses, that we write to the witnesses and that they write into the committee, and therefore all of us will have an opportunity to see their answers, and therefore I'd like to motion to adjourn so that we can get into the House for the vote.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. The committee can only move forward with unanimous consent. I do not have unanimous consent, so thank you, Ms. Gazan. Ms. Hiscock, the committee is now adjourned. Committee adjourned.